So, welcome, Paul and Bill. This is our first episode in a series around business and remote work and how the cloud is evolving. So, we've taken the opportunity here to bring two industry experts who can really share their wisdom with us in terms of, what's happening in the industry. What are the trends? What do they think is going to happen over the next 2, 3, 4 years in the IT industry, remote work, and so forth. So, before we jump into this, let me just ask you both to introduce yourselves, get some bit of background. We'll start off with the guest. Bill, why don't we start off with yourself first?
Thank you so much, Mick. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the first one. Wow, we're literally setting the bar, Paul and Mick. I'm so excited. Hey, everybody listening. I'm Bill Kleyman. I am the contributing editor to multiple really great publications in this industry, including Information Week, Dark Reading, Data Center Knowledge, Data Center Frontier. Also the program chair for AFCOM Data Center World and the investor and board member of a really cool Ukrainian company called Neuro, Neu.ro. But relating to this conversation, I have spent, my gosh, Mick, over 10 years working with application, desktop, services, different kinds of delivery methods to empower you, all of us who are clearly not at home, maybe in your pajamas, the remote worker. That's why I'm really excited to talk about this today.
Yep, and we definitely want to tap into that knowledge, experience, and a bit of scar tissue from over the years in that space. Paul, how about yourself?
I'm also bringing scar tissue to the conversation. I'm a remote work entrepreneur, very long-standing. I spent almost my entire life working on remote work businesses. I started my career as a database and systems administrator, and I quickly found out that I was being held back by my geography, that there were better career opportunities for me globally than there were locally. And so I founded what ultimately was designed to be a career vehicle for myself, but turned into a major multinational data, cloud, and infrastructure services business called Pythian as a 25-year-old when I was in 1997. And Pythian became a major remote work employer and also was remote to all of our customers. And so over the course of the ensuing 20 years of operating Pythian, I learned every possible scenario, leading hundreds of engineers remotely through their entire work life cycle, from onboarding to cultural cohesion to developing annual plans to operating those plans to everything from hiring and also obviously firing remotely. I've really done it all. And then when it comes to a technology perspective, a remote workforce, especially a remote workforce of sysadmins and database administrators, poses unique security and compliance challenges. And inside Pythian, we built the Tehama product, which we also spun out into a separate company now, in order to permit us to employ people working from home in, over 30 countries, in over 300 towns and villages in those 30 countries, to connect to customers in just about every geography all over the world without sacrificing security and compliance. So that's what my life's work has been.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Bill, of course. And it's, again, let me just say it's fantastic bringing the two of you together because correctly so, you're accurate in saying both of you have such a diverse background, definitely a lot of scar tissue, a lot of, good, negative, lessons learned, and so forth. But the key component, though, is, at least for the purposes of our discussion here today, you are visionaries and you have been out there, evolving and looking at what the future needs and so forth. So let's just to begin this, then let me just ask the question, and maybe I'll start with Paul. What is your vision of the future, Paul? How do you think work is evolving? I know, Bill, this is an important, a passionate thing for you, and we'll get to that. But how is future of work evolving? Everyone says that, but what does it mean for us in the next 12 months? What does it mean over the next 5 years?
Certainly, right now, especially as we are going through a tech job market restructuring, we are seeing a lot of technology companies either defend their cash position or their path to breaking even if they're a startup, or defending their profitability and reactions from the market for their enterprise value if they are established. So we've seen Google go through its largest ever layoffs in history, Microsoft going through similar, and Amazon going through similar restructuring. But we're also seeing startups all fighting for their cash runway, because ultimately that's the secret to success in a market like the one that we're in right now. The resources that are being laid off and that are going to rejoin the job market are going to be rejoining a job market where their employer is going to have a very laser focused idea of what it is that they need to do. They're not going to be occupying positions as placeholders, because those businesses that are replacing talent or that are hiring new talent as a result of new funding are going to be laser focused in terms of what that funding is designed to do. So the job in tech is becoming a more of a pressure cooker. The expectations also, certainly over the 5-year horizon, but even over the 1-year horizon, is that technical people who remain involved in the industry are going to be definitely demanded to be adopting every possible automation technology available. Everything from workflow automation to DevOps to test suite automation to amplifying your engineering productivity with ChatGPT or any other tooling that is available. And the reason is because right now, over the next 5 years, I'm expecting to see a dramatic increase in worker productivity and in employer expectations for worker productivity as a result of this up curve. And so a great example of that, I mean, in our own business, is at Tehama, we have automated the integration of all of the major components necessary to securely transmit work from where the human physically is to where the enterprise data assets are. These are the kinds of projects that historically a team of systems integrators would put together manually on a bespoke basis for the customer. And our product is ultimately a DevOps product and puts it together in about an hour. So this kind of productivity enhancement horizontally across the industry, not certainly far from only in our product, horizontally across the industry, is the kind of expectation that employers have of their resources over the coming 5 years.
Cool. And Bill, I think you've got definitely a lot of ideas around and thoughts around, and we were discussing earlier on with Paul about that worker, that remote worker, and what are the implications for them. It's beyond just the technology, right? Although I think we would all agree there's a convergence occurring too with AI now coming in, and that's going to have a significant impact on roles, where people can work, productivity, and so forth. So over to you, Bill. What are your thoughts?
I can't take credit for this because, Paul, you said this during our pre-call that I'm not in EUC, Bill. I'm a remote worker. And that just like, because you have to think about that for a second. And everybody on this call, a recent study from Deloitte said that the average US household has 22 connected devices. That's the average, right? And just hang on a second. If you're like this caffeinated chipmunk, can't know what he's talking about, just thinking about your own house. Just look around. How many devices do you have in front of you that might be connecting, right? I mean, I've got like a couple of devices that I use for testing. I've got a watch, I got a phone, I've got that Amazon device back there, maybe a Fire Stick or two. Like, before you know it, you realize that I'm not just this little bubble of EUC. I am a remote piece of this digital world. I am a walking, talking data generating engine. Now, that sounds really amazing, and it's a shift away from what we used to see. And Mick, I want to answer your question. What do we see over the next 3-5 years? And really, the best answer is we can take a look at what happened 3 years ago. I don't want to talk about the illness. We all know about it. What I want to talk about is the impact, what we learned, and the absolute rapid progression that we experienced as remote workers. You can't define our society now outside of understanding. I mean, look at what we saw. Schools, businesses, financial services, people who never in a million years that they'd be doing accounting and finance from the comfort of their own home in pajamas. That's not EUC anymore, end user compute. That is an entirely new context of people. And what we've experienced, REI shutting down their headquarters, we see this reduction in staff, massive buildings going away because executives are saying, hang on a second, our people can be just as productive, if not more productive. Paul, you just said this, when we give them the right tools as remote workers. And what you said even more so, I feel like you read a private equity script there for a second, because you're absolutely right. It's going to be about, I hate using this word, but it's so important, the ROI, the value of a person. What laser focused benefit do they bring to the organization? And we need to be able to understand that, and most of all, use tools to quantify their productivity. Tech people, just like you said, are going to be so important in the future, right? Using things like automation, using things like orchestration. But my big prediction, what's going to happen in the near future, if you're a technologist, if you're an architect, if you are a person who works with remote workers, in the technology space, you must have a business acumen. You need to understand how those technology, the people requirements, translate to a technological solution and an ultimate business outcome. I was taking some notes here, Paul, as you were discussing this. I am very passionate. I do have battle scars. I had the chance to work with the country's largest Citrix partner for quite some time. And then Mick and I had a chance to work on a lot of different projects. And we saw when things fell short because people were seen more as EUC, this compartmentalized technology, versus a broader spectrum of truly engaging with a remote worker. I think the future is exciting, but the future is also going to have a little bit of change. So before you get too freaked out, change is a part of this conversation, and we have to become more comfortable with change. And a big part of our growth as human beings is to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I know that's a crazy way of putting it, but please understand that's for your own success. The future is going to be extraordinary. We're going to be building upon the foundation that we've created over the past 2 or 3 years to truly enable. And you're gonna love not EUC, not end user compute, but the entity of the remote worker, the 0 and 1 of the human being, the data generating engine that's bringing you productivity. That's the exciting part. What I'm really looking forward to is the empowerment of the human worker.
Yeah, and I think there's major societal advantages to this as well. So looking at it from the human perspective is easy for me because, as I shared in my biographical notes to start, I felt held back by geography. I felt like if I wanted to have the career I wanted to have, I needed to somehow teleport myself across the distance to find those employers that could generate, now back to Bill's point, that could generate the maximum amount of ROI on what I needed to do. Okay. If you have an employer and they don't have a plan to generate ROI on your skills, they can't pay you well. So your own career opportunity is maximized by your ability to map yourself to an employer who has an opportunity to maximize the ROI on the skills that you bring. Makes perfect sense. But if you look at it from a societal perspective, there are massive advantages. We have opportunities here to heal the rural-urban divide. Okay, we live in a world where cities have acquired much more wealth than small-town America, and this has led to any number of consequences and political problems and social strife across the entire framework of our political strata. The reality is we are in the process of building digital cities, and the people who will have the best opportunity to acquire the best ROI on their talent will no longer be a function of what city you picked, whether it's New York or Atlanta. Mm-hmm. It will be a function of your technical prowess at adopting next generation technologies for remote work. And that is a foundational change in the structure of our society. And also it will change the way wealth is made and the way wealth flows. So there's a huge opportunities across society as a result of this change as well.
Mick, before you go on, I'm sure you knew this was going to happen. We're going to have a great back and forth.
Of course.
Paul, I wrote this down. First of all, digital cities, I absolutely love it, right? The convergence of OT, operation technologies, and IT is mind-blowing, right? Even in my previous company I worked at Switch, we built just huge infrastructures, giant data centers. And what I started to see was things that never in the previous life that would be connected to the internet are now connected to the internet. A fish tank, a rack, a door, all these things that would never ever have an IP address suddenly do. So that convergence is absolutely happening. But what you said, Paul, was really meaningful, that the tools that you are working with are DevOps. And for some people listening to this, they'd be like, well, all right, so developers, coders, that's not entirely accurate. What Paul is describing is a cultural shift, a philosophy, a practice, a tool, and a process. That's DevOps. That's the encompassing element of what he's building, a cultural shift, so important to understand, a new philosophy around a remote worker, a new practice in delivering core business tools to be more productive, And then obviously a tool that's super agile and a process that we can sort of evolve around both in a technical and a business perspective. It's all of those things combined together, and not just a port denom of developer operations, which, you know, that's what it is, DevOps, but it's a much broader aspect of that. And I love, Paul, that you brought that in as how you define your tool. That's cool.
Yeah, well, one of the coolest and most important things about DevOps is that we've entered into a new era where something that we, you know, in the first era of automation, what we were automating was real life tasks. But in this era of automation, we're automating the work of automating things. And when you start automating the work of automating things, the productivity on-ramp becomes exponential. And the impact of the change really accelerates and can sometimes overwhelm us. But that's really what we're talking about. The work of DevOps is the, and you're absolutely right, Bill, it's certainly not only a technological change, it's a cultural change. It's a change in your approach to your work. But it really means fundamentally that when you start automating the work of automation, you can start automating a heck of a lot more things, a heck of a lot faster, in much more repeatable and reliable ways, and create value in ways that are that sometimes come at you fast and furious. So it's a real massive change structurally in our economy as well, because not every technology is an information technology. And information technologies, in some sense, are special because they are additive. And much like Bill was mentioning a second ago, you know, we're standing on the shoulders of giants already. We are the next generation's engineers will be standing on our shoulders. And but our work is additive, and it's the nature of technology, like Buckminster Fuller famously said, that we adopt technology because it permits us to do more with less, always. But automation technologies are special. They permit us to do more with less of a particular thing, and that particular thing is labor, okay? So automation permits us to do more, is a technology, and it permits us to do more with less labor. But it's the nature of technology that it's additive. So every technology investment permits us to do more and more with less and less. And so ultimately what automation does is it permits us to do more and more with less and less labor. Labor productivity is the fundamental result of our efforts.
I love that you said automating automation, and I bet there's people are gonna be like, what did he just say? And it's like automation inception. And just to kind of, I get it, Paul. Actually, I understood I like what you said. And just to clarify for everybody, the concept that he's talking about is we're moving away from automation being this real-time function to automation becoming predictive and prescriptive. That's automating automation, right? Where it's not just a function, but it's an automation function that can then act on its own to automate a previous function that's already completed to do something in the future tense. And that is ultimately, like Paul said, designed to make our lives easier.
So just to carry that through, then I want to go back to one of your earlier points. I think Bill, you said it, or maybe Paul, about there's opportunity in change. There's opportunity. So I want to break that up into two parts, because before opportunity comes challenge, right? So what I'd like to touch on now a little bit is, what are the challenges as we move ahead? And I want to break up those challenges into two buckets. Bear with me here, okay? One is obviously from a user perspective in terms of the remote worker, the hybrid worker, and corporations and organizations that are leveraging these employees, right? How to use them. How to maintain that productivity, how to maintain that cultural connection, etc. And then the second part of that is, what does it mean for businesses such as managed service providers, who are bringing these things, combining them? Traditionally, many managed service providers may have relied on consulting, integration, a lot of that automation of the automation, right, that you guys both just touched on, is potentially, in the case of Tehama at least, that we're doing that hard yakka, as we would say in Australia, and doing the automation of the automation. So what does it mean to them? So so if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about the challenges. And then, of course, on the flip side, there's opportunity out of challenge. And what does it mean for both employees and, of course, company or organizations such as service providers and so forth? Bill, maybe we'll start with yourself.
Yeah. What a great question. And, I feel, I just literally an hour before this call, I got off of an amazing executive roundtable conversation where we specifically talked about the challenge of change. So everybody listening, we're gonna put cards on the table. We are all humans, right? We all get up and put our pants on or whatever. One leg. Sometimes people do it with 2 legs at a time. That's cool. Good job if you do that. But if you're looking at change and you think it's easy, it's not. Let's have an open and honest answer here. Like, we as humans are resistant to change, right? We love comfort. We love being comfortable and safe in things that we know. But obviously in IT and technology and working with remote workers and this rapid evolution that we're seeing in our industry, there's no room for complacency. There isn't. There's literally no room for complacency. And for those IT executives, leaders in this space that just want to keep doing things the way they're going to be doing, eventually, and I'm going to teach everyone a new acronym, you might experience something known as an RGE, a resume generating event. Yeah, those aren't fun. And they happen because you stand still while everyone else passes you by. So I'm going to try to answer those just 2 points right there, Paul, Mick, and then Paul, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So there's change and there's the challenge of change. For the remote worker, you do want to have that productivity. You do still want to have that cultural connection to your people. It's harder to do that when you're remote and when you're not a part of, a traditional office. I get that. There are things that you can never replace in interpersonal physical communication. I understand. However, we have to adapt to people and process and how they're using this technology. You see what I did there? People, process, and technology. That's the evolutionary point that we have to understand. Change is an ever-moving thing, target, whatever you want to call it in our industry. And your ability to be uncomfortable, comfortable with the uncomfortable is going to be really, really important. But it's always challenging. And one of the ways that I've seen success is through evangelizing, having champions internally. And it's a psychological approach. Honestly, it is. It's making people feel comfortable and empowered by the change instead of, fearing this change, right? They ultimately do have to feel it still. It's not an ethereal thing. Change will happen, but going in an organization and empowering those people is the way to do that. And you can't just do it for a month and then stop. That's not how the change engine works. It's an ongoing process of helping people feel comfortable. But what does this ultimately mean to MSPs and vendors and, cloud service providers? Mick, we're not going to call out names, but you and I both know of previous companies, MSPs and CSPs that were much more reticent to change. And they fizzled out. They fizzled out because all they knew how to do was sell a box and a license, where our world is fundamentally changing in that sense. So for cloud providers, for managed service providers, partners in general, being a part of that engine of change is really important in the sense of understand what these technologies are, how they work, how they impact the people, those remote workers that you're working with. See, I'm trying not to use the word EUC anymore because, Paul, I really like what we talked about earlier, and it's just blown my mind because I feel like that really encompasses the human individual instead of like a piece of machinery or computer, a piece of software.
Okay, we're talking about the person instead of the equipment they're interacting with. You know what I mean? And
yes.
They both matter. Don't get me wrong, but a human-centric view of the problem space really helps you clarify your thinking, and also ultimately, at the end of the day, technology is adopted by people because they like using it and they think they're better at their work when they do. And so it's very important to keep that human's impression of what you're doing and why in mind when you're working with it, for sure.
And I'll wrap up a final thought, Paul, before I pass it back to you. The biggest challenge that I've seen experience when working with remote workers is not including them in the process of building and designing their work experience, their remote work experience. That's a big one. Having the end user, the person who's going to be working with this stuff, the remote worker, be a part of what their remote work environment is going to be looking like, having them test it out, having them make sure they feel comfortable with it is a big part of their success and a big part of them feeling much more comfortable with this change. It's all a guidance. It's all a guidance. It's all a conversation. It's working with trusted partners like Tehama to build and create those environments that we talked about, Paul, for those remote workers, for those walking zeros and ones, because we're not going back. Everybody listening to this call, we're not going back to 2019 and how we used to do things, right? People are working from home.
Yeah.
Offices are going to close. How are you adapting to that?
Yeah, interesting story of the week is even a very well-known anti-remote work business leader in Elon Musk is sending everybody home from Twitter because he doesn't want to pay the rent. So, whatever. Whatever his motivations are, he's going to also have to figure out how to keep remote teams effective and productive. And so I'm going to kind of take Bill's answer. And you've started your answer very focused on the person, and that's great. I actually think you covered the landscape quite well, though. And if you think about it from an enterprise, the major challenges that are posed to the enterprise in a hybrid work world, where some of the team will be on site or geographically synchronized, and some of the team might be far flung. And far flung doesn't just mean geographically far apart. It also means, remember, the worst distance on planet Earth isn't in kilometers. It's in time zones. That's the team killer, although the biggest team killer that you need to overcome when you're using a globally distributed team. So there are 4 major categories of problem. I think the first one is very clear to everyone. Communication is a lot easier when everybody can share a pizza, right? This is the one pizza rule. When you have a team that can't share a pizza, either because they're not all in the one room or because they're far flung geographically, maintaining everybody on the same page so they all know exactly what's going on at any given moment, and they also all know, what they need to do to be successful individually is really a tough challenge. And there are norms and practices and cultural changes that you can adopt. This is particularly a big problem as well for collaboration. Collaboration becomes harder as well in a hybrid workforce. And one of the things that is the most impacted is synchronous collaboration. So the kind of collaboration that we used to synchronize at the water cooler or synchronize by walking around, management by walking around, that used to permit you to just kinetically connect with a person, have a very rapid and efficient exchange and move on. We need to adopt processes and tools that help us overcome the kind of friction that exists in collaboration. The third one is culture. So maintaining culture, and culture is something that you have and something that you intend, okay? So you don't get to set culture. You have the culture that you have, and then you have an intention for where you want your culture to go from here. You can also select talent for culture, but maintaining company culture and fostering that idea that I'm part of a larger whole and that together we're a team that's trying to do a thing. That sense of attachment to the vision, that is another thing that I think is a challenge for hybrid teams. That again, there are ways of overcoming those. And then the final one, I think it's fair to say that while remote work is I think a net benefit to humanity, period, and a net benefit to the enterprise in aggregate, for some kinds of workloads, it does come with a productivity tax. And countering that productivity tax through practices, through a deeper understanding of what causes the drop in productivity is another really big part of the secret of success. So in my mind, a great approach to tackling these problems and the kinds of approaches that I've championed and adopted in my own entrepreneurship are really great communication with a focus on the written word to make sure that everybody has a level set, an ability to connect and to catch up asynchronously with where everyone stands, and to try to make sure that, for us, we synchronize every weekend to make sure everyone's on the same page for where we stand and what we're going to try to do, and we have a vehicle that permits us all to communicate with everyone. As far as collaboration, I mean, these tools that we've seen develop in the last couple of years for virtual collaboration, including the one that we're on right now, have become phenomenally more advanced, okay? So shared whiteboarding tooling, shared virtual meeting tooling, these kinds of things, but also, oh man, the beauty of being able to team write a document in those online word processors that we've all, I hope, adopted over the course of the last couple of years. These are unbelievable asynchronous collaboration tools that must absolutely be adopted in order to be effective in a hybrid workforce. Company culture. I'm a big believer in you can have a phenomenal relationship with a person completely remotely, as long as you spent a couple of days a year with them in real life. I think that's a big part of it. So not skimping too much in real life interactions, I think, is a really important answer to fostering culture. But also making sure that you have thoughtfully organized virtual events to include real life events, and real life events to include virtual events. And a great example of that is we have a monthly lunch, and I bring my meeting owl, which is like a 360-degree camera, and I literally put it on the table in the restaurant. And people like Mick participated virtually in our real life lunch gathering. These are great examples of how to create inclusivity in the experience, whether someone is online or remote. And so those are great examples of building culture. And in terms of productivity, ultimately the solutions are to recognize that really good asynchronous tooling can help overcome some of the productivity taxes that come from being remote, and ensuring that everybody is aware that people do business with people that they like and trust. They don't do business with the best technology, although we think we have it. They do business with people that they like and trust because they believe that those people are going to be there for them to solve the problems when they come. And then also they believe that when they're in trouble, those individuals will rescue them, and then they will stay and strive for those individuals. This is true across the ecosystem. It's true inside a business, inside the team, but it's also true between us and our channel partners, or us and our customers. People will do business with individuals that they like and trust. Fundamentally, business is a social, not a technical. Business is a social skill. And remembering that is the key to ensuring that everybody feels productive, that feels aligned, and feels like they know how they can contribute to success in their work.
I love that one pizza rule. I'm gonna borrow that.
Oh, it's not mine, but yeah, it's a good one.
I will. I mean, I remember this one time during the pandemic. We attempted this wine tasting thing where we had a virtual sommelier. They sent us like a couple of glasses in the wine. And here I am sitting in the kitchen on Zoom with like all these other people, and I'm like, this is weird. This is so weird. I'm drinking wine and all this. You said something else I want to mention. You're right. Using synchronous tools like those processing sheets, all that fun stuff. You're right. I'm thinking about, you know what? I haven't shared my screen in a very long time. Why do I need to share my screen? Here's the document in our respective collaboration tool. Let's just look at it there, and you don't have to see my entire screen. Stop sharing screens and just share apps and content. I love it.
So I want to just add a little commentary in terms of what you both said around automation and culture and so forth. I just want to put this out, and maybe we can have a bit of a dialogue around it. The example that I would give is I was reading recently with the increasing adoption of electric vehicles. What does it mean to those people out there that are maintaining engines and ripping them apart and fixing them, etc., right? There's going to be a fundamental shift in the maintenance space, right? And I go back to one of your earlier points, and I'll be interested in both your thoughts. So if I'm a cloud service provider or a managed service provider, and I'm at one level, it's about how do I remain relevant in an evolving industry that is increasingly focused on remoteness, automation, etc. But on the flip end, if you take someone like Tehama, an organization like Tehama, we're automating the automation. I'll just play on that. I'll follow up on Paul's earlier point, where, as I said earlier on, we're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. We've done the integration. We're increasing to do the integration, et cetera, et cetera. So what does it mean from a competitive perspective, value add perspective for a service provider, whether they're cloud-based, whether they're traditional infrastructure, whether they're an integrator? How do they remain relevant? What does it mean to their business? Who wants to take that one on?
But Paul, do you want? Because I've got some thoughts here. Do you want to kick it off? What do you think?
I would love to react to what you say, Bill.
Okay. All right. Mick, I love that analogy. What electric vehicles are doing to ICE, right? Internal combustion engines. And I was going to go back even further and say that the car saved the horse.
Yeah. I mean, who was the last guy who was fixing up carriages?
Yeah, exactly. The car saved the horse, and arguably alternate fuel vehicles are going to save the world, right? They have the chance to save the world. We progress every single day. The sun rises and the moon sets. We progress, right? Unless you're like in Siberia or something, then you're going to have a lot of sun or a lot of dark for a while. But we have to be able to acknowledge evolution and not be afraid to embrace that change. We talked about that earlier. We did. And it's easier said than done, right? But change is inevitable, and you can't live under a rock with your fingers in your ears, hoping that it'll pass you by. Hope is not a good strategy, right? You have to act on these changes. So, to your point, how is this going to impact traditional MSPs and partners? I'm not going to bring up, a company that I had a chance to work with, but that was a big challenge for them, is to adapt to a new type of end user, to a new type of corporation, to a new way of how remote workers consume content, information, and critical resources. You can still sell a box and a license, but eventually there's going to be no box or license to sell. There's no other way to put it, and that's as blunt as I'm. Or it's going to be diminishing returns, greatly diminishing returns. You're going to provide less value. In return, you're going to provide less value for your organization, and the customer, the end user, the corporation are going to go where their competition is going, and that is more agility. That is more of that cultural philosophy, practice, tool, process shift, the DevOps architecture that we talked about earlier. That is the capability to shape and shift and respond to the market way faster than you could before, right? And so you go back to your analogy, Mick, right? What happens to the people working on car engines? There's still going to be people in 20, 30 years who are wanting to take that Mustang out for a ride. They're going to rev that engine. They're going to be the coolest thing on the street of quiet hydrogen electric vehicles, and they're going to be amazing, right? And there's going to be still mechanics who need to fix this, but there are going to be far fewer and fewer in between as we evolve into a next level of obviously in this case transportation. Listen, it's the same concept in technology, this as a service model, this easier delivery architecture, the simplification of technology for the remote worker are all a part of our progress as humans and as users of technology. And I hope that sits with people a little bit.
Yeah, and Paul, before you jump in, a key word there, the simplification of technology for the worker. And in that worker, I just want for those that are listening, we're not necessarily talking only about the person sitting at some desktop somewhere at home, writing whatever they need to do in terms of processing a particular application or whatever, but it's also the administrators, it's the managers, it's the chief security officer, all the way up the organization in terms of how are we simplifying IT for those so they can focus on what's core to their business. And in my mind, at least, service providers, whether they're cloud, SaaS, integrated, etc., have to be conscious of that and create value for themselves, because the days of sticking things together and constantly re-engineering with the inherent cost and complexity are really on their way out constantly, and it's been happening for the last 30 years. It's just accelerating. Paul, over to you.
So first things first, no business succeeds by wasting resources. No business, that's not a business strategy. Nobody's adopting it. Nobody's championing it. There's not like a business school in the world that's like, oh, well, we're going to do this in the least efficient way possible, and that's how we're going to win. That is not a thing. So ultimately, every business, and in this I definitely and absolutely include managed service providers, every business must learn how to do their work in the most efficient possible way. And the alternative, of course, is that another business will eat their lunch, either by acquiring more profit and therefore a better balance sheet and then buying them, or simply by acquiring the same amount of profit and winning the customer because they cost less. So no matter what, efficiency in business is the name of the game. Now, managed service providers are a special kind of business. And this is, I spent my career building Pythian, so I know exactly how they work. Managed service providers acquire a specialized skill set and concentrate talent in that skill set, and then find a universe of customers that have that need, and then learn how to do that work in a way that is streamlined and more efficient than any of those individual customers could do independently. Okay, and that's true whether you're doing that as a managed service to maintain a fleet of trucks, or a managed service to maintain enterprise technology. It doesn't matter. Okay, your job is to acquire specialized skill set, find a fleet of customers that need the specialized skill set, and then learn what you can to do that work more efficiently, thanks to the fact that you've concentrated demand in one place. So here's the point. If you are a managed service provider and you have the option to do a 30-day systems integration with professional services, putting 24 pieces together, and then operating a unique snowflake on behalf of your customer that has its unique integration challenges and its unique, non-repeatable methods of operating, or you can partner with a technology stack that has integrated more, now not all, but more, and certainly an increasing amount every year, more of those components in a fully automated, fully repeatable, which means easy to manage, which means that the problems that might occur in customer 131, you can solve for customer 131, and all 700 other customers have the benefit of that experience, as opposed to the unique snowflake where all of the problems are just yours and you get to have them all. And if your service provider solves them just for you, great, but none of the other customers have the benefit of that. Now, there's a real problem there, and that inefficiency is going to ultimately be a problem for the end customer and also a problem for the managed service provider. So managed service providers are in the business of concentrating work and then delivering the most efficient solution. Oftentimes, the most efficient solution is to deliver it through software. Oftentimes. And in fact, if there's a major trend in my entire generation of my career, it is that we are replacing manual tasks and labor with software. And that's what we do for work. Like, as a computer scientist, that's literally my job. And so managed service providers are not immune to this trend. And just to point it out, if your job is snow removal and you refuse to give your team shovels, they're doing it with their hands, that team will be less productive than the shovel team. And if you give them snow plows, that team is more productive still. Now, do you need fewer snow shovelers? Probably. And that's okay. That's okay. That's the way the world works, and that's the way it should work. No business, no economy, no society has ever won by selecting the least efficient way of solving a problem.
Yeah. So I want to continue then on that theme of efficiency. I'm picking up on these key words and I want to carry them through. So, today, obviously, a lot of organizations are moving to cloud, SaaS, etc. However, they're trying to maximize their efficiencies and, minimize their costs and so forth. We, from a Tehama perspective, at least, we work with a lot of organizations through our partners and directly globally. And one of the central themes we're constantly hearing is that, hey, I'm paying too much. I'm over-provisioned. I'm over-committed, etc. Okay, so it kind of it ties nicely into the if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So at one level, what are your thoughts around organizations and how they are using and monitoring and measuring their cloud consumption? How can they rationalize that? And then ultimately, how do they measure the efficiency of the infrastructure that they're investing in at a cloud level? Bill, you came from this space, so you can probably talk to it in a lot from your recent experience.
Yeah, this is such a wonderful topic. There's an entire new division of expertise called FinOps. And you may have heard of it, may have not. And their entire job and goal is to quantify and qualify and rationalize the cost of cloud, right? What does this widget cost me to develop and sell on-prem? What does this widget cost me to develop and sell in the cloud, right? And the saying is that you're crazy if you don't go in the cloud, but you're crazy if you stay in it, right? And for a lot of those challenges, Mick, that you just talked about, the dirty little secret of cloud computing is that the cloud bill never goes down, right? And that is one of the biggest problems that some people see, is that they can't quantify and rationalize how they are working with different services, different cloud architectures. And so sometimes very large organizations who sometimes just forget of what service they have, where they live, how it functions, fall victim to very serious capitalization issues, right? Just way too much money being spent on services or architectures that aren't being provisioned or properly utilized. it's a fascinating concept to think about. There's been a lot of research done around cloud repatriation. It's a very terse word. I want to call it more of a cloud balance, where organizations better understand what, where, and how things, different resources, different resources for the remote worker, where and how they should be accessed and where they should live. So what's fascinating is now is a lot of organizations are coming to terms and starting to understand the value behind cloud computing, how and where it should be modeled, how SaaS architectures are a great benefit to them, but also understanding the true cost of it. One of the biggest and most interesting things that I've seen are now finally regular audits and regular cycles of understanding. Okay, just because we're in the cloud doesn't mean we can forget about this node, this workload, this resource group, whatever the case might be. We need to constantly reevaluate every year. What does it cost me to develop this here versus what would it cost me to develop it in a hybrid architecture and so on? It's slow, but we're getting to a point of maturity in this industry where we're beginning to understand how cloud impacts our business. And Paul talked about it really, really well. In the sense that this is an accelerator. It is a simplification of a lot of these legacy technologies that allow us to do more with the tools that we have on hand. So when it comes to spend and cloud utilization, I'm kind of relieved that we're starting to see a better understanding of that architecture, more questions that are intelligent to help support a growing organization and an entirely new kind of worker as well. So there are still challenges, right? There's still this challenge of where people just put everything in the cloud and so just forget about it. We can't do that any longer, right? We need to understand the cost basis. We need to understand how these tools impact our business. There's nothing wrong with multi-cloud, hybrid cloud architectures. If anything, arguably that's like the de facto model, is a good hybrid architecture of what needs to live on-prem and what needs to reside in the cloud. But this needs to be an ongoing process, and it's new. It's relatively nascent, where these organizations, again, funny, an hour ago, we literally just got off a call with a big DevOps shop that said, restart a FinOps practice. And our entire job with these architects and developers is to help organizations, and this is a cloud company, understand the true cost of how and where their workloads reside. So to answer your question specifically, if you are listening to this, which I'm sure you are, so thanks for listening and watching, and you haven't done a cloud analysis or just thought about it for a second, maybe this is too high level of a word. Think about what tools, what resources, what applications, desktops, workloads, anything you have currently that is not on-prem, that you are paying for, that is in a cloud service. When was the last time you did a cost study on it? Just because it works, does it mean it's bringing value to your business, right? Paul talked about it. ROI, laser focus on value. If a executive comes into your division tomorrow and asks you, how much does it cost me right now to build this in a cloud ecosystem, and you don't have an answer, that's not a great situation to be in. So I think my big response here is we're getting to a point of maturity, understanding where cloud resources need to live and where applications and workloads need to live. But it's going to be up to you to begin the process of understanding how that impacts your organizations and your remote workers.
Yeah. And before I go over to you, Paul, the example that I would give everyone is our phone bill. I don't know about anyone listening on this, but every time I get my cell phone bill, I can't make heads or tails of it. I don't know what. There's all these things that are hidden into it. It's so complex. I just pay it because it's a headache. Right. And I think, I think Paul can expand on this, but at Tehama, at least, we've tried to simplify it, and no hidden costs, no hidden charges. Everything is out there for the end user and the partner to see. But Paul, I'll let you speak to it and maybe even expand on that.
Well, I think your telco example is really it's triggered in my mind a great way to explain what I wanted to say anyway, which is that a telco and a cloud provider actually have this in common, is they really love for you to forget that you're doing this, okay? And a great example of that is if you look at all these, onboarding, first year is going to cost $50 a month, and it's 125 after that. The beauty of these kinds of models and the reason that they work is because everything is fine in your world. Everything is happy. Your world is working, and you just accept the cost, which means that they are actually claiming a larger percentage of your bill than you can. Now, the answer is just like Bill said. We got to eliminate waste, and we got to constantly be rationalizing. And rationalizing is only possible if you have a certain amount of scale. But we got to constantly be rationalizing, should this stay in this cloud in this way? Should I be using this API, or can I install, and for example, a data API, or can I more simply manage the data platform myself internally, right? Or should I use it as a service where they're managing it and I have maybe some extra benefits and bells and whistles, but can I generate ROI on those extra bells and whistles? So rationalizing like that on the long term is really important. The other thing to realize is that the secret of cloud success has always been elasticity. Right from the early days of Amazon Web Services, what it had going for it was that you spin it up and you pay for it, and you spin it down and you stop paying for it. And there's something really beautiful about that. The opportunity to claim that, however, also requires you to be constantly rationalizing what you're spending. Okay, so that elasticity, and I mean, for what it's worth, also avoiding the large, lock-in commitments until you are absolutely sure that you've done the work to rationalize your spend and that you are intending to grow on that footprint and that you're confident in your technology choices. Because what you're sacrificing in those long-term commitments is that ability to scale up and shrink down. But you're also sacrificing two really important procurement mandates, which is performance-based procurement and multi-sourcing. Okay, so performance-based procurement is a relationship with your vendor akin to your relationship with your pizza shop. You liked ordering pizza from this one pizza shop. I'll bet you anybody who's listening to this right now has their favorite pizza shop. They're not selecting a new pizza shop every week, but nor do they have a 3-year contract with that pizza shop. Okay, and if they're hosting a party for their kids, they might order more pizza that week. And if they're out of country for 2 weeks of the month, they might order less pizza that month. So they have an elastic relationship with that pizza shop that is performance-based. That pizza shop delivers a terrible pizza with half the cheese, cold, once or twice in a row, and you're switching pizza shops. Why? Because you're measuring the performance of your vendor with every consumption of their product. You can have this with your cloud vendors. You should want that with your cloud vendors. That's what cloud elasticity offers you. Now, performance-based procurement is particularly powerful in a universe where you've multi-sourced. And that ties into Bill's point around multi-cloud and hybrid cloud strategies. Multi-sourcing means if you don't like the taste of your pizza, you have another pizza vendor available. In the cloud world, it means I don't care where I spin up this desktop. I can spin it up in Amazon, I can spin it up in Azure, my system will work the same regardless. In my universe, as a service provider, this informs our multi-cloud strategies because I can create a more durable, more robust, but also more cost-efficient model if I'm not locked into a particular vendor as a result of their architecture. So performance-based procurement and multi-sourcing go hand in hand to optimize spend. And you have to keep an eye on the opportunities to refactor for savings, and you have to absolutely manage the risk of waste as a result of neglect. So that's sort of really my key tips for optimizing cloud spend.
And at a practical level, just to take away there is absolute flexibility. Don't sign yourself off for a 3-year commitment. Okay, be able to measure and monitor and report. No hidden costs. I think they're all foundational to a SaaS consumption-based world that I think increasingly everyone's expecting. Okay, I just wanted to go into one last discussion. This one could be an endless, very long one, but I know we're tight for time, and that is around security and compliance. So I wanted to have a brief discussion on what are we seeing, what are the challenges, and we'll keep it short. Bill. 2 minutes, and then I'll hand over to Paul because obviously I know Tehama's handling things in a pretty unique sort of way too.
Really quick, Paul, I think the cloud is like a pizza shop is something I'm going to use because that is absolutely stunning.
That was
stunning enough. Being from Chicago, I have a multi-pizza strategy of Gino's East and Lou Malnati's. You know what? Multi-source, just like you talked about. I love it. I do. I wish we had more time to spend on security a little bit. Certainly. Again, looking back at the last 3 years, the security architecture has actually changed quite substantially. I've been doing a lot of research in security specifically, and I've written a bunch of reports on this as well. 91% of the attacks that happen are against a remote worker come in through an inbox, right? These phishing attacks, these attacks against people, they're not just like somebody blasting. Sometimes they're extraordinarily targeted and AI driven, where you almost don't know if it's not real or not. Everyone is a target. Full stop. Just please take that in for a second. All of you, a giant enterprise, your 80-year-old grandmother is a target for ransomware because she will pay $1,500 to get those pictures of your grandchildren back. Everyone is a target. And there are some crazy statistics out there that I've read from like WebRoot and some other ones. 40% of the people won't change their password, even though they know they clicked on a malicious link on a work laptop. Another 25 to 30% will just let their kids or somebody else use a laptop or a machine that's not even theirs, just to browse YouTube and watch cat videos. We are at an extraordinary point of digital enablement where security has just absolutely changed the paradigm of how we work with information security and data leakage. We talked about things like data locality and ensuring that we have things like data privacy. None of this is going to stop, right? And a lot of times the good guys are behind, the malicious actors, and they will never, ever lack a target. So what you need to do is work with systems that are secure by default, that are capable of isolating and geofencing certain types of pieces of data, pieces of infrastructure, whatever the case might be, and having deep levels of data security built into the underlying infrastructure to a point where if something happens, the remediation and response is near instantaneous and isolated to a very, very, very small footprint so that you don't have a massive announcement of a data leak that happened from your organization. Working with virtual resources, the delivery of applications and desktops in a structured manner, focusing on the human element, that human-centric element that we talked about, away from the piece of technology, that is an extraordinary way to empower security, because now you're creating security not just based on a device, but on a human being. That is crazy cool.
Okay. Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I just want to point out, I think the way our industry is in the EUC space in particular is organized is extremely fragile and overripe for disruption. And what I mean by that is, sorry, my alarm is ringing. What I mean by that is the industry is overripe for disruption because it's organized in a strange way. The CIO, for example, has a relationship with Verizon. And Verizon puts together cell phone towers and labor to maintain them and the real estate underneath them and a variety of other hundreds of routers and moving parts in order to provide this capability to the CIO. And the CIO cares about Verizon's security and compliance posture, but isn't responsible for it. Do you see what I mean? They select Verizon, and if Verizon screws up, they can switch over to T-Mobile. What's happening in the EUC world is fragile and unsustainable because every CIO needs to cobble together all of these components to create their own private, unique snowflake, and then they're left holding the security and compliance bag in perpetuity. And they're the ones who get fired if any components of the stack fail. Why? Because they're the ones who cobbled it together out of Lego blocks and for their own private solution that is signed off by them. I think the path towards a more reliable, more secure, more compliant EUC future is to start treating the EUC managed service providers more like telcos, which is to say, please provide me a complete solution end to end. Bring the work from where the human being is all the way to my data under your custody, and you govern it, and you keep it secure, and you ensure the compliance, and you give me your SOC 2 compliance report at the end of the year, the same as Verizon does. And that's the relationship the CIO really wants, because no business loves to build internal-facing products that aren't available in market. They love to build products that they sell, but they don't love to build internal-facing capabilities that they don't sell. And that's what we're forcing all of these businesses to do. I mean, we're in the game to change that. I think it's an important part of the solution.
Okay, thank you. So, and definitely we could probably do an hour session just on that topic. Okay, so we're at the tail end. Any closing comments? Paul, I'll start off with you if you want to just close off?
I just think it was a professional privilege to spend this time with Bill. I hope everybody else in the audience enjoyed it as well. But absolutely, it was a thrill. Thank you very much, Bill.
And Bill?
Exactly the same, Paul. Thank you so much, and Mick and the entire Tehama team. This was a really meaningful conversation. You know, just one little tiny food for thought. As you listen to all of this, we talked about so much. Have a reflective moment, like just for yourself. Just think about all the things that we said, and ask yourself, like, what parts and pieces of this am I doing? What am I not doing? And that's how you start change. One brick builds the foundation of change, and that's how you begin this process. So, of all the amazing things that we talked about, just take one thing away and begin the process of modernizing. And you'll notice that the second brick's a little bit easier to put down because the first one's there.
Well, let me just say in a closing remark, thank you both. It was a great discussion. I wish we could have done it for 4 hours, and both your personalities, we probably could do it. And this is our kickoff session, and we're going to be doing a lot more of these over the next many months. Once again, thank you very much, and I look forward to hopefully doing it again sometime soon. Bill, thank you. Paul, thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Cheers.
Thanks, team.